Fans and Neil Diamond got a surprise while his musical is on tour.
The legendary singer makes a surprise appearance and led a sing-along of his most famous song.
They say legends never die, but what they fail to tell us is that they do fade. When Neil Diamond quietly crossed into his 85th year in January 2026, the world was reminded of a devastating truth. Even the giants fall. The voice that healed millions can no longer escape the cruel reality of his condition. Inside the quiet, heartbreaking world of Neil Diamond, and the tragic reason why every recent appearance breaks the heart of everyone watching. The voice that built an empire. Before we get to what happened, you have to understand what Neil Diamond built, because it makes everything that came later hit so much harder. Neil Leslie Diamond was born on January 24, 1941, in Brooklyn, New York, to Rose and Akiba Kieve Diamond. He attended Erasmus Hall High School at the exact same time as a young Barbra Streisand, two future icons sitting in the same hallways, neither one famous yet. He later attended New York University on a fencing scholarship, but left just 10 credits short of graduating to pursue songwriting full-time. That gamble paid off beyond anyone's expectations. Diamond's earliest success came as a songwriter, not a performer, when the rock group Jay and the Americans took his song Sunday and Me into the top 20. Other artists lined up to record his material once word got around about how good it was, and over time, his songs found their way into the hands of some of the biggest names in music history, including Elvis Presley, the Monkees, and Cliff Richard. But Diamond wasn't content staying behind the scenes forever, and once he stepped into the spotlight himself, there was no turning back. Over the next 6 decades, Diamond became one of the best-selling music artists in history, moving more than 56 million records in the United States alone. He topped the Billboard chart 10 separate times, filled arenas across multiple continents, and built a catalog so deep that entire generations grew up without ever knowing a world where Sweet Caroline, Song Sung Blue, and I'm a Believer weren't already classics. In 2018, the Recording Academy handed him the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, cementing what everyone already knew. Neil Diamond wasn't just a singer, he was an institution. For 50 straight years, he toured relentlessly, building a reputation as one of the most reliable, electrifying live performers of his generation. Fans returned year after year because Diamond gave everything he had on stage. But eventually, even that remarkable run had to come to an end. But here's the question nobody wanted to ask out loud for years. What happens when the body behind all those legendary performances finally starts to fail him? The diagnosis that changed everything. In January of 2018, Neil Diamond posted something on his official website that stopped fans cold. He revealed he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and he was retiring from touring, effective immediately. For a man who had spent 50 years living on stages, this wasn't just a health update. It was the end of an era, announced in a handful of paragraphs. "I have been so honored to bring my shows to the public for the past 50 years, Diamond wrote. My thanks goes out to my loyal and devoted audiences around the world. You will always have my appreciation for your support and encouragement. This ride has been so good, so good, so good, thanks to you." His last hometown performance had actually already happened just weeks earlier, on New Year's Eve in Times Square at the end of 2017, though nobody in that crowd knew it would be his final bow in New York City. 3 weeks later, the diagnosis went public, and the touring life that had defined him for half a century was simply over. Think about what that actually meant for a man like Neil Diamond. This wasn't someone easing into a slower schedule or scaling back a few dates here and there. This was an immediate, full stop, announced to the entire world in a short statement on a website, with almost no warning to the millions of fans who assumed he'd be back on the road again the following year. Parkinson's disease is progressive, meaning it doesn't stay the same. It affects movement, coordination, and, for a performer whose entire identity was built around commanding a stage for 2 hours a night, it threatened to take away the one thing that made him who he was. But retiring from the road didn't mean disappearing completely. Diamond made it clear he intended to keep writing and recording, even if the stage was no longer his. Behind closed doors, though, few people knew exactly how he was processing the loss of the career he had built his entire adult life around. So did he actually walk away for good? Or was there more to this story than a quiet exit? The Broadway moment nobody saw coming. Fast forward to December of 2022, nearly 5 years after that devastating announcement, and something happened that nobody expected. A Beautiful Noise, the Neil Diamond musical, opened on Broadway at the Broadhurst Theater in New York City, a show built entirely around his life story, created in close collaboration with Diamond himself. He showed up for opening night with his wife, Katie McNeil, and the crowd gave him a standing ovation before the show had even started. Nobody was expecting what came next. During the curtain call, Diamond got on the microphone from his box seat and began singing Sweet Caroline himself. The audience rose to their feet and sang every word back to him. It was his first time performing in New York City since that Parkinson's diagnosis 5 years earlier. A moment so unexpected that clips of it spread across social media within hours. One fan summed up what everyone was feeling online, pointing out that a man who retired because of Parkinson's had just shown up at his own Broadway opening and sang anyway. It wasn't a full concert. It wasn't a comeback tour. But it was proof that the disease hadn't taken his voice. Not completely, and not yet. Diamond himself later reflected on how meaningful moments like this had become for him, telling interviewers that he hadn't given up and that he still felt good, even on the days when the disease made everything harder. For a performer who had once played to tens of thousands of people a night, that single verse sung from a Broadway box seat carried more emotional weight than almost anything he'd done during his touring years. The crowd wasn't just applauding a song. They were applauding survival, resilience, and the sheer stubbornness of a man who refused to let a diagnosis have the final word. So would this become a pattern? Would Neil Diamond keep finding his way back to that microphone, even in small, unscripted moments, years after everyone assumed his performing days were finished for good? The moment that made fans cry in Los Angeles. The answer came again in July of 2025, this time 3,000 miles away in Los Angeles. Diamond made a surprise appearance at the Hollywood Pantages Theater, once again attending a performance of A Beautiful Noise. And once again, he couldn't resist the pull of that song. In a video posted to the musical's official Instagram page, Diamond is seen standing up in the audience as the crowd erupts into applause. Moments later, the entire theater rose to its feet, joining him in singing Sweet Caroline together. The caption on the post called it a moment they'd never forget. And watching the footage, it's easy to understand why. By this point, Diamond was 84 years old and had been living with Parkinson's for more than 7 years. The disease attacks the central nervous system, and it doesn't get easier with time. Yet, there he was again, refusing to let it silence him completely, even if it meant only a few minutes at a time, only a handful of times a year. Just months later, In October of 2025, something even more personal happened. Far from any Broadway stage or movie premiere, Diamond showed up at a private party in Denver and, once again, surprised everyone by singing Sweet Caroline live. A video shared on TikTok captured the moment, and it spread fast, with viewers stunned that his voice still sounded so strong. One woman who posted the clip said simply that he was 84, living with Parkinson's, and still sounded amazing, adding that she was grateful he'd come to their party at all. Fans flooded the comments calling him an American icon and a national treasure, several saying they never expected to hear that voice live again in their lifetime. These weren't publicity stunts. They were glimpses of a man who simply couldn't stay away from the song that changed his life, even while a disease was doing everything it could to take his voice away. Each time footage surfaced online, the reaction was almost identical: shock, disbelief, and then tears, from fans who never imagined they'd hear that voice live again after 2018. What made these moments hit even harder was how unpredictable they were. Nobody could buy a ticket to see Neil Diamond sing anymore. There was no tour schedule to check, no announcement to watch for. Every single appearance, from Broadway to the Pantages to a private party in Denver, arrived as a complete surprise, which is exactly why each one went viral within hours of being filmed. Fans weren't just witnessing a performance. They were witnessing something that felt, to them, like pure luck. A chance encounter with a piece of living history that could just as easily have never happened at all. So what was actually going on inside Neil Diamond during all of this? How was he really handling a diagnosis that ended his career overnight, after 50 years of never missing a beat? Coming to terms with the disease. For years, Diamond stayed mostly private about how he was coping emotionally with Parkinson's. Then, in 2023, he sat down with CBS Sunday Morning and opened up in a way he never had before. He admitted that he had only truly accepted his diagnosis in the weeks leading up to that interview, meaning it took him years, not months, to make peace with what had happened to his body. "A calm has moved in, and the hurricane of my life, and things have gotten very quiet," Diamond said. "I find that I like myself better. I'm easier on people. I'm easier on myself." He went further, describing the diagnosis as something he simply had to accept because there was no other choice. "This is what I have to accept, and I'm willing to do it," he said. "This is the hand that God's given me, and I have to make the best of it, and so I am. I am." He also spoke about what happens for him specifically when he does sing, describing a feeling where everything in his mind and body seems to work together as one, calling it a great feeling. That single interview reframed everything fans thought they understood about his retirement. This wasn't a man bitter about losing his career. This was someone who had gone through a genuine grieving process, wrestled with it privately for years, and eventually found something close to peace. Parkinson's disease is often described in purely physical terms: tremors, stiffness, slowed movement. But Diamond's own words revealed just how much of the battle happens mentally and emotionally, long before it ever shows up on camera. It's worth sitting with how long that process actually took him. 5 years passed between his diagnosis and that CBS Sunday Morning interview. 5 years of a man who had spent his entire adult life performing for stadiums full of strangers, quietly learning how to live without the one thing that had always defined him. That kind of transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen for the cameras. It happens in private, over years, far away from the surprise performances and viral videos that fans eventually got to see. But acceptance is one thing. Legacy is another. So how is Hollywood telling his story now, while he's still here to see it, and while he's still able to weigh in on how it's told? His life, now on the big screen. In 2025, something happened that most musicians never live to see. A film about his life, titled Song Sung Blue, was released, and it went on to earn an Oscar nomination, putting his story directly in front of a whole new audience while he was still alive to witness the reaction. Between the Broadway musical built around his catalog and now a feature film earning major award recognition, Diamond has spent his post-retirement years watching his own legacy get immortalized in real time. It's a strange kind of gift, one very few artists ever receive. Most musicians only get retrospectives after they're gone, tribute concerts and documentaries assembled by people who never got to ask them a single question. Neil Diamond got to be in the room. He got to shape how his own story was told, correct the details that mattered to him, and watch audiences react to his life story while he was still alive to hear the applause. It's a strange kind of gift, one very few artists ever receive. Most people don't get to see how their story ends up being told. Neil Diamond did, and by all accounts, he approved of what he saw. But amid all the tributes and retrospectives, one milestone was creeping up that fans across the world had been anticipating for months. What would his 85th birthday actually look like after everything he'd been through since that retirement announcement 8 years earlier? Turning 85. On January 24th, 2026, Neil Diamond turned 85 years old. Tributes poured in from fans, outlets, and fellow musicians all at once, each one recapping a career that spans more than 6 decades, sold north of 56 million records in the United States alone, and produced songs that still fill stadiums with strangers singing in unison decades after they were written. By this point, his personal life had settled into something quieter than the chaos of his younger years. He had been married 3 times, first to Jay Posner, with whom he shares his daughters Marjorie and Elin, then to Marcia Murphy, with whom he shares his sons Jesse and Micah, and finally to Katie McNeil, whom he married in 2012 and who has remained by his side through the hardest years of his diagnosis. 4 children, 3 marriages, and 85 years, all wrapped into a single milestone birthday that arrived quietly compared to the arena tours of his past. There was no massive concert, no farewell tour, just a man, still writing, still occasionally singing when the moment calls for it, still very much alive, and still very much beloved. Across social media, tributes described him as a living legend, pointing back to a catalog that had shaped weddings, ball games, road trips, and family gatherings for more than half a century. For millions of people who grew up with his music playing in the background of their lives. Turning 85 wasn't just a number. It was a reminder that the man behind all those songs was still here, still fighting, and still capable of stopping a room cold with just one verse. So after everything, the diagnosis, the retirement, the surprise performances, the tears in every crowd he's ever stepped in front of since 2018, what does Neil Diamond's story actually tell us? Neil Diamond didn't disappear. He didn't fade into silence the moment Parkinson's entered his life. Instead, he found a different way to show up, on his own terms, in short, unscripted bursts that meant more to the people who witnessed them than any polished arena show ever could. From that emotional retirement letter in 2018 to to the surprise Broadway sing-along in 2022, to the Pantages Theater moment in 2025, to a private party in Denver where strangers filmed him with shaking hands, Neil Diamond has spent almost a decade proving that Parkinson's could take his tour schedule, but it could never fully take his voice. Now, at 85, with a hit musical still running, an Oscar-nominated film telling his story, and decades of Sweet Caroline sing-alongs behind him, Neil Diamond stands as proof that some legacies don't need a stage to keep growing. That's rare in entertainment. Most performers fade quietly after retirement. Diamond instead created a new relationship with fans through unexpected, deeply personal appearances that proved his legacy never depended on a stage. And maybe that's the part of this story that deserves the most attention. A diagnosis like Parkinson's could have easily become the headline that defined the rest of Neil Diamond's life. Instead, it became a chapter, one difficult chapter inside a much longer story about resilience, family, and a voice that simply refused to stay silent. Every surprise appearance, every shaky cell phone video that went viral, every standing ovation from a crowd that never expected to hear him sing again, all of it added up to something bigger than nostalgia. It became a masterclass in what it looks like to keep showing up, even when showing up gets harder every single year. So the next time Sweet Caroline comes on at a wedding, a ball game, or a bar full of strangers who all somehow know every word, remember the man behind it. Remember that, at 85 years old, living with a disease that tried to take everything from him, Neil Diamond is still out there somewhere, still willing to grab a microphone when the moment feels right. If this story moved you even a little, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more, because there are so many more stories like his still waiting to be told.